about recording. Perfect. So with that in mind, housekeeping is finished. And I'd like to just give you a brief overview about what we're going to be doing today for the next hour and a bit. So first of all, I want to introduce the co-chairs of the working group, and then I will pass over to all of our co-chairs in turn who are present today when we're going to be talking about our case statement, what we aim to do with this working group. We're going to talk about some preliminary work that Matt's done and looking across the current environment and ecosystem within the realm of common attributes for repositories. And then Kazu is going to be covering the use case work we've done in our meetings to date. And we're going to ask you some questions on Menti because it's a great way of showing interactivity about prioritization, what's most important to you with regards to those attributes, and also what do you think will be the hardest to accomplish. And then we're going to do some breakout sessions, and Michael's in charge of that, where we're going to be looking over existing attributes, and you'll have the opportunity to suggest some additional ones. And then we're going to have some concluding questions and discussion that will bring all of the sessions, breakout sessions, back into one. And this is where you could mention any extra information you think we may have missed with regards to pre-existing work or attributes that haven't been named. And we can really wrap it up and figure out where we are at the end of our first launch meeting. So I really am looking forward to the next hour and a half. And I will just start with some lovely pictures of all of us, so you can recognize us in the Zoom gallery or if you see us on the street. And we have Kazu from Japan, and Matt and I are in the UK. We have Washington, who's in Brazil, and Kathleen in Canada, and Michael in the States. And we also have Rosella, who's our tab liaison. And I just want to say that it's been a lot of fun so far, even though we're just starting. And I really hope that you guys stay with us through our journey and participate. And the information on joining, if you're not already a member of the working group, is available from our working group homepage. So I think with that, I will move back to the next item on our agenda with Matt. Matt's third, sorry, it's my fault, with Michael, who's going to give you an overview of our case statement. I'll get there in the end. Apologies, it's a bit early.
No worries, Allison. If you would please stop sharing, I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. All right, how am I looking here?
You're looking great.
Excellent. Let me get rid of this little guy here. So, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, so forgive me if I'm not at my freshest. But I think that what I'm going to go over is our case statement and our work plan for the Data Repository Attributes Working Group. Just for point of reference, we're really at the beginning of our work. So I think that everybody is aware that working groups in RDA usually have an 18-month timeline. And we started, towards the end of February, early March. So we're only about 4 months into our work. And so I won't bury the lead. The main takeaway is if you're not already engaged in the working group, it's not too late to become engaged. And we really encourage you. We want input from the broadest group of stakeholders possible, both within the RDA and outside of the RDA. And so, what we've charged ourselves with in this case statement for the working group is essentially that we want to make it easier for people and for machines to find data repositories, to select the data repository that is the most appropriate for whatever your use case or whatever your need may be, or your kind of data, and then to enable the integration of data repositories with other tools and infrastructures. And so, this is very much in alignment with the FAIR principles. And data repositories are really a key piece of infrastructure and a key service for stewarding data and making data available. And we have, in our case statement, outlined a number of different user groups or stakeholders that would benefit from having better information about repositories. So, we're talking about research data in repositories and how we describe those repositories. So what are the different attributes or descriptors? Examples of attributes might be, really simple things like the name of the repository or its URL. It may be, a description of the kinds of data collections that you can find in the repository. Can you deposit data in the repository? These kinds of questions that, researchers would have these questions, funders, publishers, repository managers, librarians, and registries and other research data infrastructures. And really, that's just the top of the list. There are probably other stakeholder groups out there that would be interested in these kinds of, having some standardization around how data repositories are described. So all of these different questions, and this is just, again, just kind of scratching the surface, who can access data in the repositories? If you're a researcher, for example, you might want to know, which repository you can deposit your data in. You might want to know if it costs any money for you to deposit your data. If you're a funder, for example, you might be interested in tracking the research data from the projects that you sponsor. You may have public access plan requirements or require data management plans and require researchers to share their data in repositories. And as a funder, you may be interested in tracking those research outputs. If you're a publisher, you may have authors who are asking you, okay, I'm submitting my manuscript to this journal. Where can I also deposit my data to go along with it? If you're the manager of a repository, this is a hat that I wore for about 10 years at Purdue. You are probably interested in, exposing this information and making it really easy for researchers and for users of your repository to discover your repository and know that it exists and what services it offers. Librarians are often kind of on the front lines at research institutions where they may be asked reference questions about where to find data, or they may be consulting with researchers on writing data management plans, and they need to know what appropriate data repositories are available. And then, there are registries and other infrastructure that benefit from having knowledge about data repositories. So these are just some of the many, many questions that can be answered by having good information about repositories, good description of data repositories, and trying to bring some of the existing ways of exposing these attributes into harmony and moving more towards a uniform description and standardization of how we talk about data repositories. And we're not, this is not something that we're doing from scratch. There's been a lot of good work that has been done that we're kind of building on top of. For myself, I work with re3data.org, which is a registry of research data repositories. Allison is participating in fairsharing.org, which has all kinds of wonderful information about databases and many other things relating to research. Open Door is another registry of repositories, print repositories, and data repositories. And then there are a lot of efforts, things like the Core Trust Seal. A lot of the questions that a repository would answer to become certified provide a lot of the same kind of information that the researchers are interested in or the other stakeholders are interested in. There are other vocabularies that are available that could be used or touch on the description of data repositories. Re3Data has its own metadata schema. There's also DCAT, which comes out of the W3C community. And then 2 or 3 weeks ago, if people could mute if you're not speaking, please. There's a little bit of background noise. Or if one of the other co-hosts could go ahead and mute people who are not, might be causing noise.
Yeah, I will check it out.
Thanks very much. And then notably in the US, a couple weeks ago, the Office of Science and Technology Policy of the White House put out its desirable characteristics of data repositories for federally funded research. So all of this is just to say that we're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of good work to be building on top of, and that's the effort that we're engaged in. Oh, that was not what I meant to do. There we go. All right. So working groups produce deliverables. We have two outputs that we're working on over the course of our 18 months. The first is we hope will be an official recommendation of the RDA, and the second is a supporting output. So our primary deliverable, which we will submit as a recommendation at the end of our 18 months, is the actual list of attributes. So the list of attributes is, again, at a very high level, a definition of each attribute that we all kind of agree on, the rationale for the use and the value of each attribute. Anyone who's ever created metadata before knows that it takes time and effort. Metadata isn't free. So we want to make sure that each attribute that we're proposing as part of this common set has value and has a use case behind it. The feasibility of implementing each attribute. So there are some attributes that may be desirable to be known about a repository, but are not practical or may not even be possible for the repository to produce, or they may be dynamic and changing all the time. And then last but not least, for each attribute, a gap analysis of the current availability of that attribute from data repositories. So, something like the name of the repository, feel pretty confident that all repositories advertise their name. So that would be 100% availability, 0% gap. But other things like the level or quality of curation of the data in the repository may have a wider gap. And that's useful to know because that kind of outlines what the work plan might be, and in terms of this being adopted as an output by the community. So that's output number one, which is what we'll submit as a formal recommendation of the RDA. Output number two is a supporting output. And what we want to do is we want to kind of do an environmental scan of data repositories and come up with examples that illustrate the different approaches that are being used to express and expose these attributes by data repositories to both human beings who are users and to user agents or machines. And so there are, a lot of approaches that may be kind of tried and true, things like OAI-PMH, metadata harvesting. There are newer technologies that are things like linked open data, schema.org, different semantic approaches. We want to pick a handful of these as examples just to illustrate the spectrum of different approaches to expressing and exposing these attributes, which is not to say that we're recommending a particular approach or we're saying like these guys are doing it the best. It's really just to kind of make this list tangible, and also to give people kind of maybe a menu of different examples. They might pick parts of each approach in working with their data repository of choice. So those are our two deliverables. So how are we going to get there? So this is our action plan, and this is distilled from the much longer case statement. You can go to the RDA website, navigate to our interest group or working group, and find our case statement for more detail. But we basically have 8 steps in our action plan. The first is to identify current standards and approaches to describing data repositories. That work is mostly done. Matt's going to talk about that here in just a minute. The second is to define user cases or user stories for utilizing metadata about data repositories. Kazu and Allison, and Kathleen and others are going to talk about that also in a little bit. The third is to draft the actual list of the attributes and their rationale for their use and their value. And then conduct focus groups to validate and refine the list. And we're going to begin some of this activity today with our launch meeting. This will continue over the course of the next 2 plenary meetings. Number 5 is to perform that environmental scan to identify our exemplars for our supporting output. And then go ahead and draft and submit our recommendation, the list of attributes to go through the community review process in the RDA to be accepted as a recommendation. And then to basically do the same for the supporting output. And then last but not least, to conduct outreach, to present, and to promote the adoption of the outputs. So that's the action plan. Here's the timeline. The first three we're done with. We conducted a birds of a feather session at P19, which was essentially to kind of jumpstart our case statement, and that was submitted and approved. We began monthly meetings in March of 2022, so 3.5 months ago. So we meet on the third Thursday of every month for an hour and a half. Again, you can find the meeting information on the website. The third thing is to put together early drafts of the current descriptive approaches and use cases and the list of attributes. Again, these aren't complete. This is a working group, so this is definitely a work in progress, but we'll be sharing some of the early results of this and get your input on them here in the meeting today. And then I do the environmental scan to identify the exemplars, submit the list for the recommendation shortly after RDA P20, and then based on community input, revise and submit the exemplars, I think around this time next summer, and then use the remaining time that we have for presenting the outputs and to report to early adopters by P21. So that's our 1.5 year timeline. And like I say, we're about 4 months into our 18 months. So we're off to a good start. But it's not too late to join our working group if you haven't already. Again, just navigate to the RDA website, look for the working groups, and you can find our case statement and join the group there. And then we also had a great opportunity through RDA US to participate in the new Data Streams podcast. So Matt and I had a conversation with each other that was recorded and edited and put out as episode 2, which is the current episode. So if you're interested in a little more information and some banter about the working group, you can find that here on the RDA website in the Data Streams podcast. So that's the introduction to the working group, our case statement, our action plan, and our timeline. I just want to pause right now before I turn it over to the next speaker to ask if there are any questions. Everybody still awake?
Maybe I can say a word about the meetings, the regular meetings. I would like to encourage people to participate because it's very open and the discussions are really interesting.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Francoise. All right, Allison, back to you. Thanks.
I shall pop my video back on. Yes, thank you. And thank you for that in general introduction to our case statement and what we're all about. So what we have next, broadly, I was thinking about, sorry, I've lost my tab, so I shall just speak. What we have next is Matt talking about what we've done in terms of a current environmental scan and where we are with that. And then we're going to move from that onto some more interactive sessions about the use cases. So Matt, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you.
So yeah, as Michael mentioned, we're really not starting from scratch here. Part of the work that I've done in the early weeks of the project is to really undertake a landscape analysis to see what was out there already, really looking to undertake a broad analysis of the landscape to see what work had been done already in terms of listing attributes of repositories. There was quite a lot of activity that's already been done and in different spheres and different areas, but nothing entirely comprehensive as far as we've found so far. I think it's fair to say that lots of groups have been compiling lists of attributes and features, and through the work we found over 20 pieces of work which are talking about repositories in this way. Obviously some are very focused, like Michael mentioned, some of the registries that we have involved in this project, and obviously they are looking at capturing specific information about repositories. So a lot of what they're doing will overlap a lot with the efforts of our project, and some which are more tangential, which are talking about repositories in a more general way. So what I've done is I went through all the sources we mentioned in our case statement, and we had quite a few responses to the case statement that we proposed, and lots of people mentioned other potential sources that we hadn't yet found. So I added those in. Michael mentioned the Birds of a Feather session that we had last year. We had really good attendance at that meeting and lots more input from our group members and potential group members, and they've made lots of suggestions too. We also did a bit some general web research, and in the early meetings of the working group, we showed the attributes landscape analysis to group members and asked for their input, and we had some suggestions there too. So if you're in the collaborative document, you can, the collaborative notes document, you can see there's an attributes landscape analysis link in the resources. So feel free to go and click into that so you can have a look. But it's clear that the people who've done work on this area are really quite different, and lots of them have different ambitions or aims in mind. So Michael already mentioned Core Trust Seal, who are pulling together things about repositories to enable certification, but we're seeing lots of other groups who are involved as well. So funders like National Institutes of Health, the registries that I mentioned like Re3 Data and Fair Sharing. Michael just mentioned a new one, which I've just quickly added, the OSTP thing that came out in May. So that's now on there, but only very recently. But I think it's also really interesting to see that there's some groups that are very specifically thinking about different subjects. So life sciences or medical, and then others that are very general as well. So I see someone's sharing the screen. But yes, so we now have 21 standards or lists of features, and we've been breaking them up by the name, who they are being managed by, and then trying to group the stakeholders so you can see whether they're from repositories, communities, funders, and then trying to keep up with some of the timeline of these. So when they were created, if they've been updated, the web locations, so if people want to go and look at them. And then we've also had some feedback from our interest group, working group members, that it might be good to start to categorize when they are focused on a specific subject area. So we're pulling out the life science, space science ones from the general ones, and then some other points and kind of general notes as well. So that's kind of the main bulk of the work that I've been doing. But as Michael said, this is still a working group. If you know of other resources or kind of sets of attributes in this area, then feel free to make suggestions or add them to the sheet, or let me know, put them in the chat, and we can add them in and make sure that they are involved and incorporated into the next steps. So yeah, I think that was all I had to say about the landscape analysis. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. That was just me sharing, just because I
Yeah,
thought
no,
in
it's
case
fine. Thanks,
some
Alison.
people hadn't clicked through or didn't find the right place, I just show them. It's a lot. It's, to me, some of the most interesting work that we'll be doing here, because there's a real opportunity for the RDA to present something that is cross-domain and also really speaking from all parts of the community. So that's why we are so keen on adding members and doing a lot of the work within our meetings themselves. Our meetings are real working meetings. So it's good fun, and I encourage you all to join if you haven't already. Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate that. So I now do have the agenda up for everyone to see. And what we're going to do now is just move a little bit more from the environmental scan over to the use cases and some work that we did in some of the previous meetings that we've had with the working group. And for that, Kazu is going to lead in this particular part of the meeting. So Kazu, I shall stop sharing. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. So let me share my screen. And Michael, maybe we don't have a breakout room in this Mentimeter, maybe because since we would like to use the Mentimeter, we would like to do it in a same one single room. So the Alison, am I correct? So we,
yes. So for the Mentimeter, we'll stay in one group. It's only for, I think, for Michael's section that we'll be moving into breakouts.
That's right.
Just to have. Perfect.
Okay. So in that case, where's a screen share? Okay, here is it. So as this is Kaz, I'm from Japan. As Michael said in the first presentation, so at the beginning of our session, it was happened around the May or February, March. So at the beginning, we got the case study information by using the Miro sticky board, the service, and got the information like this. And we gave the question like, as somebody, I would like to do something in order to do something. And based on this, the sticky note information, we try to reorganize or decompose the information and try to formulate this kind of matrix. So in this table 1, so this shows the table, the stakeholder versus requirement. And then, so not only this, we also try to make the different kind of the table like this. So this is a new table for showing the mapping information between the requirement and the versus attribute. And at the beginning, when we try to design this the RDA session, at the beginning we try to create a new, yet another, the different new table like this. But due to the lack of the times, maybe we cannot do this. So maybe we were trying to create this kind of new table by the small subgroup or in at the monthly call. So please join to our the session monthly call, and then please join to this work with us. But anyway, today, since we don't have good enough time, so we would like to get the information from the participants by using the Mentimeter. So before starting the Mentimeter, so please access to this code, or I'd like to copy and paste the direct link to the Mentimeter. Where's chat? Okay.
I've got you, Kazu. I've popped it into the chat.
Yeah, thank you. So everybody can join to the Mentimeter right now. And so if you could join to the Mentimeter, please ask to the question, and then yeah, give me your role, and then push the submit button. So like we did in the first beginning session, when we got the sticky note, there are, so even in this session, there are different kind of the role, different kind of the people joining to this session. So it's a good sign to get the variety of the information. So almost everybody could answer to this question. And is there anyone who cannot join to the Mentimeter or still in trouble to access to the Mentimeter code? So in that case, please let me know by using the chat, and then we will try to assist to how to access to the Mentimeter. But I guess there's no trouble with that. So we almost got the the answer from everybody. So then I would like to move on to the next question. So based on this, the information, the next question is, so choose your top 4 priorities for repository attribute. So we have already shown the 11, 12 attribute on in the screen. So maybe you can make a choice from 4 from this. Yes, we are getting the information. It can answer.
Maybe while people are looking through them, I can just make a brief comment about the role answers we saw on the previous page, because I like to look and see what everyone has as their main role. And of course, there'll be plenty of people who have more than one role. And when I'm looking at the results, I noticed that quite a few of us are in data support roles. We've got data stewards and curators and open science specialists. And I really like to see that there are so many people within data support that are working towards this, because this is where a lot of the engagement will come when ultimately we end up with the outputs of this working group. So we've got the data support roles, and then we've also got quite a lot of people who have varying roles within development of repositories. And so I think that we've got a group of people today who are really the sort of people that will be able to help most, and also that we can help them most with our outputs in the end. That's all. It's nice comment. Yeah. It's interesting to see the results.
Thank you. Based on that background, so if we check the result from this, the question, the first priority is the metadata and the data creation. The next one is the fair compliance. Maybe that support and also the core trust still have a good branding and that value for the repository supporters. So yeah, not only me and Alison, please, Matt and Michael also please join to this, and speculation or how to read this answer from the audience.
Oh, I do like the joke that's going around the chat about it being a race for attributes and a race for priorities. It does seem that way. It's very exciting. I think you're right though, Kazu. Metadata and data curation has just beaten out fair compliance, hasn't it?
And Lindsay, you also actively joined to the monthly call. So do you have any comments based on this and the result regarding the top 4 priorities? So you can turn on your microphone and then speak up if you are ready to.
Yeah, what is my feedback on these results?
Yeah, anything, yeah.
I think one thing that would be interesting to do this slide again, but make exceptions for certain selections. So let's say something's in development. What are you willing to risk in the short time? And then what's the guarantee on future sustainability planning, right? So like, what are the first things you're kind of willing to like flex on if supposedly it's being, refined or optimized? And because that's an interesting way to look at it again.
Yeah. So maybe we lead to the, that everybody has already been answered to this question. So is there any different view based on this, on the feedback from the participants? Mac and Michael, do you have anything? So, yeah, Francois, please. Yeah.
Yes, I have a comment. I think that I put it in the chat already. I think we don't have probably any end user in the room. And so it has to do with the fact that the fees are at the bottom. I think that we all agree, and the users would agree also, that the quality of the content is absolutely at the top. So we all agree with that. But one of the things users, the potential users, would like to know is the perimeter. The perimeter does not go up, it's somewhere, but not very high. And when you are a user and you are looking for a registry, you need to know the perimeter. So I think there are things, if we were end users, the result would not be exactly the same, probably.
Yeah, that's right. You are correct. So, and I can say the same things when we run the monthly discussion. So how do you solve this kind of problem in observability, the discussion when we try to prepare the infrastructure or services on behalf of the voice from the end user. So of course, we are the program manager, and has to know the feedback and the needs from the end user. I mean the researchers, but in some case, because of our the position as a librarian or as an engineer or as an infrastructure developers, so we cannot reflect the purely not able to reflect the voice from the end user. I mean the researchers, Francois. So based on your the experience, so is there any comment how to run the monthly the call or the workshop in order to reflect that truly the voice from the end user?
I would suggest that we always, I am not sure we can bring end users, but I would suggest that we all have this in mind all the time. And
Yeah,
that
right.
from time to time you stop and you try to think you are an end user in your own domain, and what would you think of what you are doing? And because there are many people who are working in registries, in repositories, but I hope from time to time they've tried to think as a user. So maybe we can do this exercise among the participants from time to time.
Yeah, that's right. It's a the very painful the comment. Me as a infrastructure developers, we also have to develop and reflect the voice from the end user. But sometimes we're gonna be some selfish and try to do the things I wanted to do, regardless the voice from the end user. So we need to never forget that this kind of aspect when we learn the monthly call. So now from that aspect, is there any comments from the librarians or the things we have to do when we develop the list of the attribute? No. Or so from the different aspect. So is there any side of view or any different view based on this result? Yes.
I think the takeaway for me, Kazu, is just that, when we put together our list as a working group, we really need to, put a special effort into including end users into our focus groups so that we don't, we're not operating in an echo chamber of, research infrastructure service support, and we're actually talking to, the real people and the real concerns. Because I think that some of these things, like have already been commented, would kind of be flipped around, like no fees, for example. If I'm a PI on a grant, that's probably the first thing I care about.
That's right.
Yes, maybe we could try to find one or two RDA groups which could have end users in mind. So it's a bit complicated because in many of them, there are many people who work rather on support positions, but they are in contact with end users. So it's not directly end users, but we could try to find one or two groups and to submit them to try to discuss with them at some point. There are the thematic groups also, but again, these are not end users. It's people who are working all the day to make things happen in general.
Yes, it's the things we have to always in mind and keep it in mind. So, but anyway, so let's move on to the next question. So this question was the top four priority for repository attribute. And the next one is, to change. It's the most difficult attribute for the repository to adopt. So please think about as a repository, the manager or repository operator, or if you are not running the repository by yourself, maybe you can imagine the things about the difficulties. What's the most difficult attribute or the things when we align with. So we provide in 12 the choice, and then you can make a choice from the four from this. And based on the result we've got today, and also maybe we will reanalyze again before the monthly call between the co-chair, and then try to find out how to reflect to the next work. Yeah, that's right. The large data set is always pain. The important was in a previous the question, the data creation and the metadata was and one of the top priority, but at the same time, everybody are feeling that it's so difficult to adopt. The screening also somehow related to the data creation. So this aspect is so difficult. However, in case of the citation information, so maybe that everybody is so familiar with the citation information. It's much more easier than the different aspect. So if everybody has already been respond to the question, we've got almost the final answer. Yes. So based on this, the response from the participants, the Matt, is there any view from your perspective, or is there something you could say on the response?
I guess my day job is with a publisher, so I guess I don't really have much. I wouldn't like to say with any certainty what might be difficult or easy for repositories to do, but I would agree, and I think I voted that the data screening on deposit is going to be difficult. I think from my viewpoint, curating data is difficult and time intensive, and to do it properly requires experts, and all of those things cost money. And given the conversation we just had about fees, I think it's very hard to balance the high quality curation with making it accessible and affordable for end users. And so I think those were the two things that I had, that this kind of, it's not just that these things are hard, but they're hard to balance as well. You kind of want to do both. You kind of want them to be free and have high quality curation, but balancing those is difficult. But as I said, I'm not an expert. That's just my view.
Yeah, thank you. The Francois, please.
Yes, I have a feeling that these things fell into different boxes. You know, there are things which are difficult because you need expertise. Or I see screening is only automated. I am a bit worried when everything is only automated. But if it's automated, you need an expert tool, which is very well trained to do the screening. So you have things in which you need expertise, things in which you need manpower, and in some cases manpower with expertise, and in other places, storage of large data sets, it's just the technical capacities in a sense. So we are mixing, it's okay to do it that way, but we are mixing things which are a bit different. But it's, I think that expertise and the fact that things are labor intensive are probably felt more by the people who run the repositories or who work for the repositories. And so again, it depends who answers the questions. If you do curation the whole day, in the end, you know it's very difficult and demanding.
Yeah, you are correct. So maybe we have to create more precise the table or the feedback depending on the role or the the responses.
Or maybe you could group things in the analysis a posteriori, you know. With these kind of things in mind, you can have topics like this and then put them together in the analysis because they tend to say we need people, which means we need money, but it's not only money, it's also expertise and so on.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe we also have to categorize the skill or environment or something like that way. So please, the Michael, please.
Yeah, I was going to observe that for these questions, there's really kind of two ways to answer. I mean, one is like the difficulty of implementing the service that's being described. And then the other is just simply the difficulty of describing and exposing that. So for example, describing the size of data sets that you accept into your repository and how large they could be may actually be a fairly trivial thing to do that. If you have a policy that says we accept data up to, whatever, 3 gigabytes, but that's a different thing than actually accepting large data sets. And I think that for repository managers in particular, in describing the services that their repositories offer, that it's harder to describe the attributes that have the most uncertainty around them. So like fair compliance, there's a lot of discussions around what that actually means, so that may be something that may be difficult to describe. And then just the other thing too is that, and maybe this goes unsaid sometimes, but we're not keen on advertising the things that we don't do or that we don't do well. You know what I mean? So for example, if I have a repository that doesn't have a preservation policy, by de facto, I'm not advertising that I have a preservation policy. Or if my repository supports metadata, but maybe it doesn't follow like best practices, that might not be something that I would highlight and advertise in the description of my repository. So just a couple of observations.
So the Michael, so you mean in the following the monthly session, so there are two aspects or the things we can approach. So I mean, so when we would like to create this or the attribute, so then there's a thing that we can create the list which the people would like to utilize it. But at the same time, so when we evaluate the current state of the repository, so maybe they can compare not only just checking the things they can do it, but at the same time maybe they would like to check out the thing they are unable to do that at this moment as a repository. So So maybe from that two different aspects, maybe we can chase the discussion. I thought like that way. But okay, Lindsay, please.
This just kind of came to mind, and I don't think it comes naturally to think about it this way, but when you submit a manuscript to an umbrella of, like maybe a publication service, if it doesn't fit there, sometimes they'll pass it on and say, hey, this doesn't fit our journal, but I suggest you put it here. You don't actually see that happen with repositories, that, there's no almost like collaborative effort to say, hey, we believe this would support the community best here. Is that an option for you? And like sort of helping that feedback if someone didn't know, because that's kind of an interesting option. I mean, I would like that feedback if that was the case.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Lindsay, I guess there's a bit of that between Dryad and Zenodo, right? So I think if you submit a data capsule to the Dryad repository and you submit a code capsule, they'll go and put that in Zenodo where there's better functionality. Like, I guess it's not like a full suite of this is the best, but like they recognize that, I think a few years ago, they recognized that there was no point trying to replicate all the functionality. So they agreed that if somebody tried to submit something for curation to Zenodo, it would go to Dryad and vice versa. So I think there is a little bit, but that's the only example I can think of.
Yeah, I think where I find challenges in the domain space actually is because they're so unfamiliar with a more open-based approach, because I actually really love those repositories a lot. I think they're doing it the right way for sure. But if there's an unfamiliarity with it, there's a lack of trust. So that's that piece that's still missing across the board, is like, we can still trust open source repositories. Here's how. So yeah, it's a great point though.
Okay, is there any further? Okay, please.
Yes, it's going back to what is said about FAIR. I think that there is a difference for the thematic repositories, depending if they have, FAIR compliance, which is more or less close to the Dublin core attributes, which are very generic, and how deep they go in the disciplinary needs. So I think that one of the things, it's hidden in FAIR compliance, it's hidden in metadata and data curation, but the expertise, again, about the disciplinary expectations, the expectations of disciplinary users, is something which is underlying, and we have to understand where to put it, because it depends a lot on the perimeter of a repository. If it's a generic repository, it's a generic repository, but it's different if it's a thematic repository. There are disciplinary aspects which have to be taken. So if there is disciplinary, you need to have disciplinary expertise somewhere. And it's something which is useful, but it may be a bit difficult to tick a criterion on it in this kind of analysis, but I think it should appear somewhere.
Mm-hmm. So you mean that even from the end user point of view, there's a so different variety of the users, from the beginners and also the more specific, the deeper, the researchers, I guess.
Yes, I think if you are a disciplinary repository used by the community, they expect from you that you go very deep in the granularity of metadata and all these things. And if you are a generic repository, no one can expect that you can go deep in the description, which of a disciplinary linked aspect of the data. So there are different things here. So the perimeter, it's linked to the perimeter again. So I think that there will be a need to use the perimeter, maybe to define some of the criteria. I think about this because in core trust seal, the starting point is to say what you are and the context, and everything what is expected afterwards comes from what you are. You are not expected to do some things if it's not in your mission. It's okay. I mean, it has just to be explicit that you don't do it.
Yeah, you're right. So try to be aware about it. So, and then maybe this is the final question. So what other attributes are you important for you? So this is a free description, I guess. So you can write it down as you want within 250 characters. So, but anyway, please write it down as you want to the. Yeah, that's right. So related to the question that Francois said. Yeah, that's right. So maybe we have to include these kind of new aspect, and also have to correlate to the stakeholder. I mean the role of the stakeholder. Yeah, that's right. Some of them has already been listed on a list in a list, but that some of them is not yet aware under the current work. So it's so informative. So we have almost done to this question. So maybe so we will try to gather, of course, gain this information and try to the feedback to the main our discussion in the monthly call, and then try to put it again in our new table, and try to reflect to the final the output. So maybe I guess it's better to give my microphone to the next speaker. Is the Michael or so? Okay, so Michael, please. Yeah, have to stop my sharing.
All right, thanks very much. That was awesome. Okay, so we're going to move into the last activity of the session. We'll take about maybe 20 minutes for this one. So we are really, again, we're at the beginning of our work, right? So, you know, we've just got initial use cases, an initial list of attributes, but this list is, of course, incomplete. And so what I want to just share with you very briefly are the attributes that we've been working on within the working group so far. And again, these are just a couple of weeks old. So we have these 20. So the first one is the name of the repository, an identifier for the repository. So remember, these are all describing data repositories. So you could say repository name, repository identifier, you know, the link to the repository, a narrative description of the repository, the subjects or keywords for the content of the repository, a contact for the repository who administers it, the location of the repository, what institutions manage the repository, does the repository issue persistent identifiers like DOIs for data, what services and APIs does the repository offer? I'm at 11 now. Curation, does the repository offer curation services? Who can deposit data in the repository? What licenses can be ascribed to data sets for reuse? What is the mission statement of the repository? What kind of repository? What is the type of repository? Is it a domain repository or an institutional repository or what have you? What are the restrictions to accessing the repository? Certifications like Core Trust Seal or ISO 16363. What is the format of data, or what's the content of the data in the repository? What metadata formats are used to describe those data sets? and then the preservation policy of the repository. So that's a really quick flyover, and I'm sorry that was so fast, but I just wanted to provide a little snippet of context for each of those attributes that we've currently been working on. And then there's a link to a document. I'll drop in the chat here in just a second. That is the actual working document that the group has been using. And so what we'd like to do with the remainder of our time is basically breakout groups. We want your help to help us identify what attributes we're missing. Okay, and so what we'll do is I'll go back to the slide with the list of attributes that we have. And while I'm dividing people up into we'll do 3 breakout groups with co-chairs in each of the breakout groups. But take a minute to look at that list, and on the side, kind of jot down any attributes that you think are missing that should be on that list but aren't. And then when the breakout group begins, in your group, each take a turn sharing 1 attribute each so that everybody has the opportunity to participate. Talk a little bit about the attribute that's missing so that everyone in the group understands what you mean by that attribute, and then add it to the Google Doc under your breakout group number. So breakout group 1, breakout group 2, breakout group 3. And I would just say, like, quantity over quality in coming up with these attributes. We want to brainstorm as many of them as possible. So don't worry if you think like, okay, is this attribute actually the same thing that's on the list, or is it part of something that's on the list? Go ahead and add it anyway, and maybe just jot down a note saying, this might be included in preservation, but did you think about this? And then if more than one person came up with that attribute, maybe make a note of that too, because that's useful information for us in validating, okay, more than one person thought this should be on the list and it isn't. Or more than one breakout group thought this attribute should be on the list and it isn't. Okay, so we'll spend, let's say 15 minutes in the breakout groups. For each breakout group, one person from the group keep track of the attributes. And when we come back together again, we'll do very, very quick 1 to 2 minute report outs of the attributes that you came up with that are missing, and maybe 1 or 2 comments about the process or things that percolated out of the discussion that are salient. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to the draft list of attributes. And so while I'm setting up the breakout groups here, be thinking about what is not on this list that should be. Okay. I'll try and do this over on the side so you can. All right, the breakout groups are open. Go ahead and join your breakout group now, please.
Hey, Matt, am I in 2? It looks like, because I haven't been invited into 1, but it doesn't look like there's, is it 2 or 3. No, Kazer's in 3.
Hey, Allison, it wouldn't let me add you to one because you're you're the host, I think. But
Oh,
would you be
right.
in room 3, please?
Yeah, I can go to room 3.
Thanks. Hey, Lindsay, is it an obscene hour for you too?
I've been up for days at this point, so it doesn't even matter anymore. Like I think I've been having cat naps. So it's, you know, it's really not too far from my regular work schedule. So, you know,
You're a
yeah.
champ.
Yeah, it's like it's a 11:20 here. The hard ones are like the 1:33 o'clockers. You know, you have to gamble how much you want to learn.
In just a few moments, everyone will be forced back into the main room. Just like when Thanos snaps his finger at the end of the Marvel movie. Oh, no, wait, that would mean that half of you would disintegrate. That's not what happens.
Thank you, everyone. That was fun.
All
Look at
right.
the breakout groups. We've got lots of stuff here.
And that
So
was
I figured I would just put those fields like I saw Allison was doing that, the label, description, examples, and the rest. So I'm just going to add them in there, and everyone who was in my group, feel free to put those in if you'd like.
It was only because I started typing in the wrong document, but it's a good idea.
That's all right. So we fully realize that you did not have enough time for this activity, but thank you for being game and giving it a shot. This is maybe stimulate some thinking that we can carry over into our regular monthly working group meeting. And for those of you who have not been joining us, we hope that you will, if only to be able to finish your thought before you got cut off there when the breakout groups ended. So we have 7 minutes left in our session, and we want to stick to time. But I'm hoping that the group leaders can be very concise in summing up their attributes in their group. Matt, can you get us started off?
Sure. Yeah, we had good discussion. A few things came up that were interesting. So expert support for users. Does the repository, are they able to answer questions around either general things or specific things like licensing or anonymization of manuscript, anonymization of data, for example? Versioning we thought is important. So can people version their data or is it static? And then most of the other things we had are just like questions for other things, like for example, is the credit role taxonomy included in metadata? Is the financial model included in type of repository? Is mechanisms to facilitate blind review within services? So it's just like more like signposting things that we think could fall into those other existing 20, but just to make sure. I'm done.
That was a great summary. Thank you. And concise too. It's appreciated. Lindsay, can you represent the work group 2, please?
Sure. We actually kind of had some underlining themes with trust and security, really. So, you know, we covered things like, are there selectable curation options, right? You know, if you want to pay for a service to have something, you know, looked over by an expert. Text language translations. Can you translate the text at that repository to describe the data? Is that a major component? Sustainability, so having a minimum long-term preservation, and how is that guaranteed? Backup storage features, what are those? You know, what are the 2 resources, how often? And then sensitive data protection, I think that's probably on everybody's mind. So whether it's human data, any sort of data where there's risk that applies. So I think they were good category, actually.
Outstanding. That's terrific. Thank you, Lindsay. And then Allison, over to you for group 3.
Yes, thank you. As Lindsay said, I think there were some common themes even across breakout groups. We talked about funding and how it was important to know the source of funding of the database rather than the data sets within it, although that's something that's probably beyond the scope. And we were talked then that led us to questions of sustainability, which breakout 2 talked about, and also the fact that we need to be careful how much information we ask of people. We don't want to go too deeply into particular details. It might be interesting when we're considering these attributes if we want, you know, a simple yes, no, or maybe a little more information, but not to make these things too weighty. And then finally, as in fact mentioned in breakout 2, we talked also about provisions, whether a repository would have provisions for sensitive data. So very similar.
Terrific. This is really it was a good exercise. I wish we had more time for it, but I think that we've really primed the pump for the next couple of working group sessions. I think we really have our work cut out for us, and kind of neatly laid out too. So thanks everyone for your contributions to the use case and prioritization of the attributes, and also with this helping us identify what attributes are missing that we should be considering. That wraps up this activity. Allison, back to you to wrap up our session, I think.
I would love to. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. And we just have a minute or two left, but I do hope that you've learned something if you haven't yet come to visit us before, or if indeed you have been with us before. And I know quite a few of you have, that you've enjoyed contributing to this extra session as part of the plenary. It's going to be really exciting over the next 4 to 6 months, even as we get moving both on what we decided here and the next items within our activities list. So as everyone has said before, please come and join, add yourselves as a member of our working group, and come join in the calls when you can. Is there anything else that anyone would like to cover, any of the co-chairs or any of the members? Well, then one of the things I've done is I've popped in the agenda, I've popped little screenshots of the Menti results, but I've also downloaded slides, and I'll add those as well, so you can have a look at the results later if you wish to use them. That's everything, I think. Does anyone want to say anything else? All right. Then it is 2 minutes before we have to finish. In fact, 1.5 minutes. I think that's pretty awesome. And I shall just finish by saying thank you for coming and being part of the plenary. And Mike, oh, that's so great. He's showing us his dog. I do have the cat, but I'm not sure I can move. Let's see. There, a cat. Do you see her? Sitting on the chair. Oh, just some time for some RDA pets, huh? Kira, you're, thank you. Thank you for the hand clap. I thought you were going to raise your hand there for a second. Okay, thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your time at the International Data Week.